Hey, somebody's here. Daniel's here.
Hello?
Hey, Daniel, how you doing?
Uh, Fine.
That's good. I'm gonna wait about 2 minutes or so and see who else shows up, and we'll go from there. All right?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Did you hear what
Okay.
I just said?
Yeah, I'm just having problems with this. I have a quick question.
Yeah, go.
I'm doing chapter 10, assignment 1A,
Uh huh.
and it has pages 357 and 359. Is that correct?
I think so. Let me double check. It's yeah, it's 356 to 360, and then you do uh AV1 on 357, and then the reading checks on 359 and 360.
Yeah, about that. I've been trying to
Mm-hmm.
look for the I don't think I have it in my packet. Is there any way you can send me a PDF so I can see it from there and do the assignment from there?
Yeah, I think I sent you one. Let me double check. Give me a second.
I'll double check myself as well.
Okay, just yeah, give me a minute. Let's see. I sent you one on April 8th. It should have it.
All right.
April 8th at 9 p.m.
Yeah, you sent it to me. I found it. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Um, what do you do? Do you like teach us lessons in this or something like that, or is it just for questions and answers?
Yeah, I was going to. Let's see. You and Maisha are here, so I can go ahead and do that. Have um, have you read any of the notes that I've assigned over the last couple of days? Have you looked at those yet?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Um, so what I'm going to do, and this is what I usually do each Monday, is I go over the notes and I kind of do like a down and dirty quick version as quick as I can since I only got an hour. And after each day's worth, I'll take a little pause and ask if you have any questions or anything. But since you said you looked at the notes, was there anything like in particular that you had any questions about or that stood out to you or anything?
No, I can read the notes, but I have a hard time remembering the notes. I'm trying to reread the notes again and again and see if that will help me out to remember the notes.
Okay, so I'll go over them and see if any of this stuff helps or not. Um, so the first day of notes pretty much goes over Gettysburg, the battle that a lot of people consider the most important one of the Civil War. Um, Lee had invaded the North in the summer of 1863, and Lincoln had sent General Meade off to look for him. Both sides are actually looking to fight the other side, but they don't know where each side is at, and they kind of stumble upon each other by accident um, on June 1st in Gettysburg, which is in southern Pennsylvania. And so the first day, these guys are just really starting to go at it. Um, Lee's guys are winning on the first day, but they don't like put the finish and blow on them. So the second day, Lee has a lot harder time because that night a lot of General Meade's guys have shown up to kind of dig in. Then on the third day, both sides have taken a lot of damage, but Lee thinks that Meade's guys are have suffered more. And so Lee thinks that he's going to throw everything he's got into one last push to try to break through the middle of Meade's army, and that was called Pickett's Charge. And I've always said this. I don't know if Pickett Elementary is named after this Pickett. I've tried to look and I've never really found an answer. But Pickett is the guy who was under Lee, who charged the Northern lines that day, and they were just slaughtered. It was really bad. Lee lost really badly. He didn't have anything left to fight anymore with, so he has to retreat back toward Virginia. Meade had a chance to trap Lee at the Potomac River, which you have to cross to get into Virginia. It's a very big river, kind of deep, and so it's going to take time to transport thousands and thousands of troops. Meade could have chased Lee down and wiped out his army. Lincoln told him to. Meade didn't, so Lincoln demoted Meade. He didn't fire him, but he doesn't want Meade in charge of this army anymore. Lincoln's problem the whole war is he has not been able to find a general with that killer instinct to finish Lee off. But now he is coming to realize that Grant will be a good fit for that position. So by the time the year is over, he is going to promote General Grant to be in charge of the entire Union Army. In the meantime, Lee is hurt so bad that he will never be able to go on offense for the rest of the war. And Lincoln goes to Gettysburg himself later on that year to dedicate a national cemetery. I think Daniel, you did the Gettysburg warm up, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so that speech is the most famous speech that Lincoln ever gave, and they used to make kids memorize the Gettysburg Address. I know I had to do it when I was in elementary school, but basically it's a little 2-minute speech where Lincoln is going to dedicate the cemetery. There's a lot of other famous people there. Lincoln's was very short, and he basically said, "Look, this country was started on the idea that all men are created equal." And now the world is doubting whether or not a nation started on liberty can last very long. And, we can't make this land holy because the people who died here have made it holier than we ever could dream of making it. And if we stop fighting because we say, hey, we've suffered too much, then the people who died here will have died for nothing, and we can't let that happen. So we need to, suck it up and have one last big push to win the war so we can have a new country where we'll actually follow this idea of all men are created equal. Because remember, the war is also about freeing slaves, and he's made that clear. And he said, we're going to have a new government of the people, by the people, for the people, which will never die, which will never go away. And so that really kind of, made us toughen up and accept the sacrifices that we were going through. That's pretty much what Gettysburg is all about. Either of you two have questions about Gettysburg in any way?
No, I got it.
Okay. So what we'll do next is the next day of notes is pretty much Grant chasing down Lee, and I've got a couple of maps I want to pull up real quick. So just bear with me a minute. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to put this up on the screen real quick for y'all. Daniel, can you see this map?
I barely see it. So blurry. I don't know if it's my screen or your screen or what is it.
Let me see if I can find a clear one. The problem is a lot of these don't have any color to them. So when I try to use the other ones, like a lot of kids have told me they've had trouble trying to keep up with it. Let me try this one.
I'm still new to all this like online class.
Yeah, when this all started in March, this was a hot mess for me. How about this one? Is this any better?
Oh yeah, I see it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So the blue is the Union. That's the North. That's General Grant's army. And the red is Lee, the Confederates' army. And so what you're looking at here is um, Grant chasing Lee down because Grant told Lincoln, he said, "Look, I'm gonna start heading toward Richmond, which I think you can see on the near the a little bit more than halfway down. It's that city with the red circle and the star in it. Richmond, remember, is the capital of the Confederacy, and Grant knows that if he can capture Richmond, the whole Confederacy is probably going to fall apart. So Grant tells Lincoln, I'm going to take Richmond and I'm not coming back until I'm done. All right. And Lincoln knows that he can trust Grant on this. The problem is Lee knows that. Lee is going to try to block him. And those are all these little yellow splotches you see. These are battles where Lee is trying to block Grant. At the top of the map, where it says the wilderness, can you read out what dates those are? Daniel?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Can you read what dates it says under the wilderness?
It says May 5th and 6th.
Correct. So that's the first time that Grant is blocked by Lee. They fight at the wilderness for those 2 days. After those 2 days, Grant knows he can't beat Lee, and so he's going to try to step around Lee. Okay? And
Oh, so
so, go ahead.
he's gonna step around Lee. Okay, I
Correct.
get it.
Yeah. But Lee, since he's from Virginia and he's kind of got his front to him, Lee kind of figures this out and he can move faster, and so Lee is gonna go back around and block Grant again at Spotsylvania Courthouse. And you see that battle takes, I think, like 2 weeks or something like that. And so that's a very long, bloody battle. But again, Grant is going to step around Lee and try to go around him to get to Richmond. And Lee blocks him again at North Anna. But you see, each time this happens, can you figure out what Grant is doing each time he steps around Lee and they do this back and forth? Do you notice a pattern on this map?
It kind of just keeps on making this like giant loop. They keep on like when they get close together, they battle, then they separate each other, then they get back together and battle again. It seems like this like pattern in the map.
There is. And then the other pattern also is that each time they have these battles, it gets closer and closer and closer to Richmond. And so by the time you get down to Cold Harbor, you are right outside of Richmond. Cold Harbor is like as close to Richmond as like the community college is to the high school. It's like, a 5-minute drive, give or take. And
They're
so, go
they're
ahead.
almost practically touching there.
Yes, and so it's close enough that Grant feels like he can taste victory. The war is that close to being over, and so Grant at Cold Harbor is going to make his last biggest mistake of the war. Grant he is going to charge into Lee because he can't go around him and get to any closer to Richmond. So he's going to just go straight at Lee 2 or 3 different times in one afternoon, and Lee knows this. So Lee has dug trenches, and the thing about trench warfare, it's very hard to take a trench because if someone shoots at you, you just duck, and then while they're reloading, you pop up and you hit them. And so Grant lost many thousand men that those days he was at Cold Harbor. Lee lost almost none of them. So this was Lee's last big victory of the Civil War. But Grant, by June 12th, figures out that he can't take Cold Harbor. So what he's going to do instead is he's going to swing south around Richmond in like a big circle, and that's where you see that battle at Petersburg down underneath. Because Petersburg is super important to Richmond. You have, I think, 3 or 4 different railroads coming in there. And can you tell me why railroads are important in this war?
Um,
Or you can guess?
because railroads are important in this war because they provide better transportation.
Yes, you can. The South needs transportation badly. They need soldiers, ammunition, food. All of those things come through railroads, and they all meet up at Petersburg, and then they go north to Richmond. So Grant knows if he can take Petersburg, he'll cut Richmond off from the rest of the South, and then it's just a matter of time. So he tries to take Petersburg in the middle part of June, as the map shows you. He's not successful, but that's okay because now Grant can dig trenches and Lee also digs trenches. So you have 2 sets of trenches facing each other. And Grant's not going anywhere because he promised Lincoln he's not going to give up. And Lee can't go anywhere. And so they both just dig in and go and stare at each other pretty much from June of 64 all the way up through April of 65. And that siege isn't just a siege of Petersburg, but it's kind of a siege of Richmond as well. And the longer this goes on, the less and less supplies Petersburg and Richmond are going to have. And Grant is going to start stretching this out, where he's going to take a few guys every day and go a little bit to the west of Petersburg, and then Lee has to take his guys and go west of Petersburg. And the longer they stretch out to the west, the weaker Lee gets because Lee's running out of guys. If Grant needs more guys, all he's got to do is go on the telegraph and ask for more guys, and Lincoln will send them. But there's no guys left to give to Lee. And so Grant's playing kind of like the long game here, if that makes sense. While all this is going on, you have another guy I'm going to show you real quick. There we go. This guy is General Sherman. And he kind of looks like he's got a bit of an attitude, wouldn't you say? Like that look on his face.
He does got an attitude.
Yeah, yeah. So Sherman is a guy you do not want to get on his bad side, and Sherman is able to capture Atlanta in the fall of '64 while this siege of Petersburg is going on, and that's going to make Lincoln really popular leading up to the election. And Sherman tells Lincoln that I am going to basically tear a path of destruction through Georgia that's going to be called the March to the Sea. All right. And I'm showing you some of these pictures in the background where you see lots of fire, lots of, people tearing stuff up. This is a illustration I've shown in class before. This is Sherman's army going up through Georgia. You see the soldiers tearing up the railroads because when they leave, they're not going to stay in Georgia. They're just going to cut through Georgia and tear up everything they can on the way. And that way, when they leave, there won't be any way for the Confederates to move supplies on the railroads. That's why they're tearing up the railroads. There's a telegraph pole that they're cutting down and tearing up. There's a farm in the background they're burning because the farms are farming cotton. Somebody's joined us. Daniel, you're on here twice.
Whoops. I'm trying to transfer.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, that was causing. Yeah, you're good.
Aye.
So they're burning the farms because the farms have food and the farms have cotton, and the cotton, they're the Confederates are using that to sell for money. If you look way in the background, they're tearing up a bridge in the back. There are slaves who are running to freedom across the lines. So this is, showing, Sherman tearing stuff up. What this does is this really shakes up the South because, Georgia's like the heart of the South, and the South is all shook up like, man, if he can just run through Georgia and we can barely even put up a fight, how much longer can we hold on? You know what I mean? So questions about those notes?
No.
Okay. So the next set that we've got is we've got the election of 1864 and the end of the war. Lincoln is running against McClellan. McClellan is a general that Lincoln had fired early in the war because McClellan was too slow to fight. And so McClellan took that very personally. He ran for president to to end the war and negotiate an end with the South instead of just beating the South. McClellan lost every state except for 2 states. And so Lincoln's big victory, he took that to mean that the voters wanted him to end slavery once and for all. Because the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln had released earlier in the war only freed slaves in the Confederate States. There were border states where slavery was legal, like Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, where slavery was legal, but those states stayed with the North. They didn't fight for the South. So Lincoln couldn't end slavery there unless you changed the Constitution. And so he gets Congress to pass the 13th Amendment that banned slavery in all of the states. And so that is sent out to the states in 65 and they start to ratify it. That, that siege, that blockade that Grant had of Lee, it gets too much for Lee in April of 65, and Grant is able to cut through the lines and Lee starts to run. He starts to run off to the west, and Lee is chased by Grant all the way because Grant knows as long as Lee is out there fighting, the war will never be over. And so Grant is chasing Lee down, and he finally traps him from all sides at a place called Appomattox Courthouse, which I went to back when I was in college. It's a pretty little place out in the middle of nowhere, but that's where he is trapped. Lee surrenders. Grant and Lincoln agree to be very generous with Lee because if you are hard on Lee and arrest him or put him in prison or put him on trial, then the South will, take that very hard and they'll want to get revenge someday. Grant and Lincoln know if you go easy on the South, there will not be a second Civil War. Nobody wanted a second Civil War. So that's kind of where their mindset is. Let's see. Lincoln gave a speech at the White House where he said, let's, reunite the country and be happy the war is over. But he congratulated African Americans for helping win the war. He said that the country would not have stayed together if it wasn't for African Americans in the military.
So this is after the Civil War? Like this is the aftermath of the Civil War?
Yeah, because once Lee surrendered, that was pretty much the end of the war. Lee surrendered on April 9th. And so Lincoln gives like a victory speech from the White House and says that, you had almost 200,000 African Americans fight and they should be citizens of the United States. They should be allowed to vote. And you had a famous actor there listening to the speech who hated Lincoln because he had a lot of friends in the South and he wanted to kidnap Lincoln earlier and hold him for ransom. Now he is so mad that he wants to kill Lincoln instead.
Wasn't that the warm up that you told us that was a couple days ago about him killing Lincoln, or was that a
Yeah,
different?
that's the one. So John Wilkes Booth, the guy with the mustache in that picture, that's the guy who actually shot Lincoln in the back of the head. And there were two other people there who were part of it. One of them stabbed the Secretary of State in the neck and almost killed him. And then you had a third guy who was going to kill the vice president and really destroy the whole government of the United States, but he chickened out that night. And they all got away, and that's what that wanted poster was. They were looking for these guys, and they hunted Booth down and killed him 12 days later. Of the other people who were arrested were convicted of treason and they were hung. So that's how the war ends. The South is in ruins, slavery is over, and the federal government is stronger. So that's the end of the Civil War, unless you had questions about that.
No, I got it. And they most likely didn't want another civil war to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, because that was the last homework assignment. That was Chapter 9, Section 5B. One of the questions was, what other two wars were the next bloodiest after the Civil War? And there's a pie graph on the last page of the reading where it shows the Civil War. You had as many Americans die in that war than every other war put together. Like we think of World War II as a bloody war. World War One is a bloody war, but the Civil War is bloodier than all of them put together. And so nobody wanted anything like that to ever happen again. And so that leads you into Unit 7, this reconstruction thing that's going on, where we're like, okay, let's try to make things so we can really keep the country united together, deal with the problems that the South had that led to the Civil War. And so that whole Reconstruction period lasts for the 12 years following the war up until 1877. Lincoln started to plan all this while he was still alive. His idea was to have what was called a 10% plan, where you take 10% of the white guys in each state and say, all right, you guys started this mess. If 10% of you apologize, swear loyalty to the Union, then we'll give you your powers back. 10% is not a lot. Like you got 10 fingers, if 9 of them say, no, we hate you, and one of them says, yes, we'll listen to you, Lincoln says, hey, that's good enough. The rest of you guys will come around, when as time, goes on. But Congress doesn't like that plan. Congress is made up a group of people called the Radicals. They're radical Republicans. And Lincoln doesn't like them too much because they want to punish the South. And the Radicals are led by this guy I'm going to show you in a minute. There he goes. Can you see the guy I blew up on?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Thaddeus Stevens. He is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he is a radical Republican. Radicals, if you might remember from Unit 3, these are people who want extreme changes. Like the radicals in France didn't want to just let the people have a say, they wanted to kill the king. All right. So the radical Republicans, like this guy Stevens, they were extreme because back in the day, hardly any white people thought that African Americans deserved equal treatment. Lincoln, when he made his speech right before he died, he was talking about the soldiers. He wasn't talking about everybody. All right. But the radicals said everybody should have full rights, everybody should have citizenship. And they didn't like Lincoln's plan because it wasn't going to punish the South enough. So they tried to pass a harsher plan that Lincoln vetoed because Lincoln didn't want to punish the South. They all agree on this thing called a Freedmen's Bureau, and that was going to be set up by the Congress and run by the Army. where you have all these soldiers in the South, right? And but the war's over, so you don't need all these soldiers in the South. So my question to you guys: what are a lot of the soldiers? What's going to happen to them now that the war is over?
Um,
What's your guess?
hold up a second.
Daniel, you with me?
Yeah. Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah. Question is, what do you think is going to happen to a lot of these soldiers now that the war is actually over?
They're gonna not have jobs. They're gonna be probably homeless.
Well, they're not going to be homeless so much, but they're, remember a lot of these guys, they didn't choose to join the army. A lot of them were forced to join. A lot of them were drafted. And so now that you don't need them anymore, you can send them home. They can go back to New York or Illinois or Ohio or wherever they came from. And so what are you going to do with all of the extra uniforms you need? Because they would give them like extra uniforms so they'd be ready to, get fresh boots, fresh uniforms. They had food rations that they don't need anymore. And so the idea was you would give them away to the freed slaves who need all this stuff. They also said, hey, the people who were slaves, they're not going to be able to get any kind of decent job because they've never went to school. Most of them don't even know how to read and write. And so the Freedmen's Bureau started setting up schools to educate people who used to be slaves. They also said, well, hey, you got to sign contracts because you're free and you got to do business. But if you don't know how to read, you're going to get ripped off. So we'll look over these contracts for you and let you know what's in them, so you don't just have to trust people who are, going to do bad stuff and all that.
So,
The thing is, go ahead.
so they were trying to help these people, not only to read and write, so they can help, so these slaves can benefit them in businesses. In order to benefit them from businesses, they need to first read and write. So they set up these schools for these slaves to learn how to read and write and the basic knowledge of businesses, so they can help America. They were trying to use these people for good. They were trying to benefit not only the soldiers but the slaves and help them grow America.
Right, and remember, they're not slaves anymore, so you don't have anyone, taking care of them. I know that sounds kind of weird, but remember, when they were slaves, their owners, would be responsible for feeding them, clothing them, providing them shelter. And now that they're not property anymore, nobody's told them how to take care of themselves. And so, but you have to get a job to take care of yourself. That's how it is in our society. People take care of themselves by having jobs and paying their bills, but they've never had that. And so the Freedmen's Bureau is going to help them get set that way. And then once they know how to do it, they can teach it to their kids and they'll be all right. So the Freedmen's Bureau kind of gives them a start for, being free. The thing that sucks the most about the start of Reconstruction, though, is Lincoln getting killed. Once Lincoln dies, it's going to change a whole lot of things because when the president dies under any situation, who takes over for the president?
The vice president.
Correct. And the vice president, when Lincoln was killed, was Andrew Johnson, which I'm going to put a little picture of him up real quick. He is the warm-up assignment for today, is his whole plan of Reconstruction. And Andrew Johnson, a lot of people consider to be one of the worst presidents we ever had. The reason Lincoln picked Andrew Johnson is because this was Lincoln's way of showing we were going to bring the country together. Lincoln's a Republican, Andrew Johnson's a Democrat. Lincoln's from the North, Andrew Johnson's from the South. Andrew Johnson was the only Southern senator who did not quit and join the Confederacy when the war started. So Lincoln wants to reward him and tell the South, hey, we can all get along if we just understand we are a united country. But Johnson, because he's from the South, his culture is way different. Lincoln cared about the African Americans. Johnson did not. Johnson grew up a poor man. Johnson himself didn't know how to read until he was about 25 years old because his wife was a teacher and she taught him how to read. So Johnson is afraid that the African Americans who are free are going to try to get jobs, and that's going to make it harder for poor white people in the South to get jobs. And he also is worried that, since there are a whole lot of African Americans in the South, in some states you have more African Americans than white people. He says, man, now the politicians are going to have to listen to what African Americans want instead of what poor white people need. And so Johnson does not want any of that stuff to happen. So Johnson wants to go even easier on the South than Lincoln does, but he wants to punish the wealthy white people because he said, hey, it's their greed for cotton and money is what started this war in the first place. And so the South is willing to play along with this plan that Johnson has. And so they start discriminating against African Americans and setting up what were called black codes, where African Americans had to sign a labor contract that would last for a year at a time. And if you found an African American just, walking to the store and it was the middle of the day, a cop could stop him and say, hey, where are your papers? And you would have to show papers saying, I work for, Farmer Billy Bob over here, and Billy Bob gave me permission to get some nails from the hardware store. And if you didn't have permission or if you didn't have a labor contract, they could take you and auction you off to work on a farm as punishment. Now, white people didn't have these problems. It only applied to African Americans. Their children could also be forced into apprenticeship jobs where they would be taught to pick cotton, where if they did a bad job, they could be whipped. This looks a lot like what, Daniel?
Slavery again.
It does. It's very much like slavery.
They're just kind of just repeating the same thing, but with children now.
It